You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. So as I'm sure many of you guys know, a lot of video game companies hate the number 3. I also think as consumers, we've come to realize that the third game in a franchise or series generally seems to leave people with a sense of disappointment. While there are definitely some notable exceptions like Fallout 3, Grand Theft Auto 3, and Halo 3, we've also got other games like Mass Effect 3, which was inferior to the first 2 games. Mass Effect 3's ending was terrible. This even extends beyond the realm of video game software itself and into the realm of console hardware. The Nintendo 64 was Nintendo's third home video game console, and it didn't even match the success of the NES or the SNES. There's also the Sega Saturn or 32X. I mean, we don't even know which the third console was, but we both know that both of those weren't as well received as the Genesis was. The same thing can be said of Sony's PlayStation 3, where both previous platforms, PlayStation 1 and 2, were far more successful. Even the Xbox One is susceptible to this third entry into the franchise curse. Some people still think that the Xbox One is still an always online box. But enough about Xboxes and PlayStations. We're here to talk about Borderlands 3, some of the hype surrounding it, and whether many people's wish lists, including my own, are going to be bad for the game when it finally comes out. I think I can see both sides to this argument, so what I want to do is I want to discuss the positives and negatives for a lot of this hype. So let's go ahead and get into it. Depending on how you look at it, hype, wish lists, and various other things would help Gearbox figure out what the player base's expectations are for the next Borderlands game. While I suppose someone could make the argument that people don't really know what they want, I also think that to a certain extent, people do know what they want out of a new Borderlands game. I would say most people essentially want more of the same, but with some new tweaks and additions that make the original Borderlands experience better. Something like having the ability to pilot buzzards and other flying vehicles would be a nice new addition. Further tuning the controls to feel more precise would also greatly help with the next Borderlands game as well. A great example of how to do it would be to look at Bungie's experience with the Halo franchise. Halo 1 was a great game. Halo 2 improved upon Halo 1 with online multiplayer, and Halo 3 started to add features like Forge and other new game modes. Now, not to hate on 343 Industries, but I think one of the reasons that Halo 5 wasn't received as well as it was because it didn't launch with Forge and other game modes that players had come to expect from the Halo series. Look at Halo 5's lack of split screen. Imagine if Borderlands 3 didn't have split screen or local multiplayer on the console versions. This would be in direct opposition to how the previous Borderlands games have been marketed to consumers as a cooperative experience. In my mind, understanding and knowing the expectations of your player base is really important for your game. What better way is there for your community to voice their opinions and thoughts through YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, or even other online forums? I look at it this way. How else is a developer going to know whether or not you want a particular feature in a game? If no one ever talked about having colorblind options in Borderlands 2, I think it's safe to say that they may not have ever appeared in Borderlands 2 at all. As far as the pre-sequel is concerned, if no one on the Gearbox forum complained about having a test dummy or refarmable bosses, it's safe to say that the game never would have been patched to have refarmable bosses, and the test dummies might not have even appeared in the Claptastic Voyage DLC. It is for that reason I think you should be making wish lists, speculation videos, or even theory videos about the next Borderlands game, whether that's going to be Borderlands 3 or whatever else they decide to call it. As far as I'm concerned, there are a lot of things that were better in Borderlands 1 that didn't make their way into Borderlands 2 in the pre-sequel that I would ultimately like to see in Borderlands 3. Weapon proficiencies are something that I definitely prefer to badass ranks. You've also got Atlas and S&S munitions weapons, both of which were cut from Borderlands 2, despite Atlas being mentioned in the game. I also prefer Borderlands 1's combat rifle to Borderlands 2's assault rifles, as I think the former are better balanced against the other weapons of Borderlands 1, where assault rifles on the other hand are pretty bad in Borderlands 2. At the same time, it's kind of interesting to mention that rocket launchers are kind of bad in Borderlands 1, but they're awesome in Borderlands 2. I love my Norfleet. And now for the other side of this argument. I think it could be argued that player expectations can sometimes be too great for the developers to fulfill. I may upset some people by saying this, but I think if you're expecting Gearbox to absolutely blow your mind with Borderlands 3, I think you're ultimately going to end up being disappointed. This is because the first 3 Borderlands games we've received already weren't 90 plus Metacritic games. Borderlands 1 is an 81 to 84 depending on the version, Borderlands 2 was about an 89, and the pre-sequel was a 75. Now, by no means are any of the Borderlands games bad, believe me, I wouldn't have a YouTube channel right now. But Borderlands 2 was the only one that came close to becoming a 90 plus Metacritic game. That's not to say that Gearbox isn't capable of blowing our minds with the next Borderlands game, but I think we'll ultimately see what happens, but don't get your hopes up. In a certain way, I think Battleborn also suffered some problems due to the Borderlands player base's expectations. I think many people, including myself, went into the Battleborn beta thinking that the game was going to be similar to Borderlands. Instead, what we ultimately got was this weird mashup between Left 4 Dead and League of Legends. Now, in the Borderlands player base's defense, Gearbox did market Battleborn as a title that was from the creators of Borderlands, where they probably should have marketed it as a MOBA. Overwatch probably didn't really help things either. If you look at a lot of the games that have been coming out in the last couple of years, you'll notice that many of them were really overhyped. While Fallout 4 was definitely a good game, I think a lot of people were expecting it to be a lot like Fallout New Vegas, and that's a situation where, again, the player base expectations deviated from what the developers, I guess, ultimately delivered. Or look at the original Watch Dogs. Aside from the graphical downgrades, Watch Dogs was hyped up in a way to make you feel like you were this amazing hacker. Ultimately, Watch Dogs was supposedly like a redundant experience that turned out to be buggy and unoptimized. More recently, look at the hype surrounding No Man's Sky and look at how things that were promised with that game weren't even delivered. To this day, No Man's Sky doesn't have a multiplayer mode. But then again, I'm not sure how you could have had a procedurally generated universe and still have multiplayer, but it is what it is. As far as Borderlands 3 is concerned, we also have to consider that Matt Armstrong, who is one of the creative forces behind Borderlands, is no longer working at Gearbox Software, and it's safe to say that he will most likely not be working on the next Borderlands game at all. Matt Armstrong's departure will without a doubt have an effect on future titles in the Borderlands franchise, and despite being more technically polished in some areas, the pre-sequel didn't really involve Gearbox Software's original creative talent and is considered to be the lesser of the 3 main games in the franchise. At the same time, though, I would say that the recent Doom reboot that came out this year turned out pretty well. Neither John Romero or John Carmack worked on the recent Doom game, and it was awesome regardless. I would say as far as Borderlands is concerned, most of the major creative talent behind Borderlands 1 and 2 is still at Gearbox, so I think that the next game will probably be pretty good as long as they get enough development time. Ultimately, I don't think wish lists or videos theorizing and speculating about what will be in the next Borderlands game are bad at all. There are a lot of people within the community that have some pretty good ideas, and even if many of the ideas that are suggested don't turn up in the final game, that's okay in my opinion. I know you guys have heard me say this millions of times by now, but something that I would like to see is mod support in the next Borderlands game, or at the very least, some kind of user-generated content. Will that happen? Maybe not, but it's worth talking about it so that it might happen. After all, if you seek something, you may eventually find it. Gearbox's job at this point is to develop the best Borderlands game that they can. They've proven that when they actually try and develop a game, whether it's DLC content or not, they actually do a pretty good job. Tiny Tina was really good and was developed in-house by Gearbox, and it shows. I guess in closing, you should be excited for the next Borderlands game. Just make sure your expectations are in check though. Expect something that's somewhere in between Borderlands 2 and Borderlands 1 in terms of quality, or at the very least, that's what I'm doing. Alright guys, that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like and let me know, do you think community-driven hype for Borderlands 3 is good or is it a bad thing? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, if you like this video, please be sure to leave a like and take care, and I'll see y'all next time.